And you see people working really hard to keep wheels turning and to keep them turning smoothly. You get reminded of, not for the first time actually, of how important government is, or civil service rather. Which brings us, of course, to Donald Trump, who is embarked at the moment, or at least his co-president, Elon Musk, is embarked upon a project to dismantle all of these systems that essentially keep civilization on rails. And we will no doubt look into some elements of that a little later in the programme, or a little later in the week, because we begin with the biggest story of the morning internationally, which is the reports regarding Donald Trump's conversation with Vladimir Putin. And if your brain works in a way that is anything like mine, you will find a headline including Trump and Putin start talks to end the war in Ukraine. Trump says he has opened talks with Putin to end war in Ukraine. And are you thinking what I'm thinking yet? Trump's shock call with Putin to end the war, but will peace deal betray Ukraine? There's the Daily Mail actually getting it a little closer to what I suspect is troubling you than the other two headlines managed. Because how can a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine be negotiated between Russia and the United States of America? Well, in a way, the answer is quite straightforward. The United States of America is the world leader in this sort of context, a position it has achieved as a consequence of decades of leadership. By dint of its involvement in world affairs, both military and financial, and of course due to economies of scale, the fact that it carries more heft than any other country in recent history, means that it becomes a de facto leader of the free world when it chooses to be so. What I find fascinating about what Donald Trump is currently up to, and you'll allow me to say this on my first day back from a longish break, what much of the British media seems to be very slow to notice, is that Donald Trump doesn't want to be the leader of the free world in terms of responsibility. He doesn't want to provide moral, financial, or military leadership. If you're wondering what I mean by moral, just think about what the word sovereignty means. So, Vladimir Putin invades sovereign territory of Ukraine, and the world order that respects the rule of law or that respects territorial integrity, balks at the very prospect. But Trump's only been in the White House for 3 weeks, and he's already insulted the sovereignty of Canada, the sovereignty of Greenland, Denmark, and he's barely started. He's barely drawn breath. He doesn't care. He has an attitude to international relations that's a lot closer to Vladimir Putin's than it is to anybody else who's ever inhabited the White House. But he still wants to be the leader. So if you withdraw support for Ukraine, you cease to be, in any way, qualified to comment on what should happen to Ukraine. And the word that has really surprised me this morning by popping up so frequently in my head as I read around the story and refreshed my memory of some of the elements and some of the new developments, the word I've got, and the word that I think will form the basis of our phone-in today, is appeasement. By coincidence, there's a story in the newspaper today about a letter Neville Chamberlain wrote in 1940, just days after quitting as Prime Minister, in which he conceded that he was quite relieved to no longer be in the job. That appeasement policy towards Nazi Germany, the idea that a promise from Adolf Hitler that he would stop his imperial ambitions having invaded Poland would somehow be binding, has of course become a byword for prime ministerial incompetence. And the minute you start thinking about Neville Chamberlain, you start thinking about Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, the European leader who saw the threat of Nazism long before anybody else did. Daily Mail was still writing editorials about what a top chap Adolf Hitler was and why Oswald Mosley would make a brilliant prime minister when Winston Churchill was warning about what Adolf Hitler's rise would do. Once again, I find myself heartbroken at the failure of people in my industry to be ignorant of even the most basic history of our own islands. People talking up Trump at the moment, utterly ignorant of the fact that their 1930s equivalents were talking up Hitler and Oswald Mosley. But it's not Trump that we're comparing to Hitler today. It's Vladimir Putin, who invades sovereign countries and banks on apathy, ambivalence or incompetence from other Western leaders. That's how it works. It worked in 2012 or 14, forgive me. I said I'd been reading up on stuff, but my mind does occasionally go blank. When he went into Crimea, he banked on a swift resolution and apathy from the White House, apathy from Downing Street, a lack of appetite for getting stuck in and resisting these abuses of sovereignty. And what you have happening now is essentially Vladimir Putin having done to Ukraine what Hitler did to Sudetenland, what he did to Poland in 1939, getting a phone call from the White House about, hey, maybe we could come to some sort of arrangement. Maybe we could come to some sort of peace deal without including Poland in the conversation, or indeed Sudetenland. Maybe you're not going to be able to go back to the borders that were there before this illegal invasion took place. And I don't know whether it's because I've had a few days off or whether it's because, once again, I'm going bonkers. But I can't quite believe that people don't see it as clearly as that. Imagine if, and I don't know how good your history is, imagine if FDR had phoned Hitler in 1939 to discuss a possible peace deal after the invasion of Poland. How would that have been reported in the UK media? Probably in some corners of the UK media, like it's being reported today. The idea that Trump has opened the door to a possible peace deal. FDR opens the door to a possible peace deal. But where does that leave the Polish people? Where does that leave Ukrainians? And the other element of this conversation, of course, is the question of what happens next. I always, when I come back from a few days off, have too much in my head. I start thinking about one thing, I've told you this before, and it just starts flying off. So we've already brought FDR into it, we brought appeasement into it, we brought Neville Chamberlain into it. I'm also reminded of the way in which Estonia a few years ago started introducing media literacy education to its schools with a sense of urgency, because the misinformation that can lead to riots on the streets of countries is now so much a part of public discourse that Estonia took the view it needed to start teaching children what Russian propaganda looked like. Otherwise, they could end up believing things that are simply not true. And that swings me back, would you believe, to the jury service that I've just done, or rather not done, and the fact that I found myself sitting at a canteen table, listening to a conversation at the next table, where a middle-class, middle-aged woman of apparently completely respectable demeanour started trying to tell all of her lunch companions that Volodymyr Zelensky had spent all the money that has been sent to Ukraine to fund their army on luxury yachts. She later moved on to an explanation of how she knew that Michelle Obama was actually a man. But that, of course, is why the Estonian government took the view some time ago that it has to start teaching children how to deal with propaganda, how to deal with fake news, how to deal with misinformation. So, looking at the world today, thinking about this intervention from Donald Trump, a US president who cares not a jot for sovereignty and who doesn't want to be a leader in any meaningful sense. He doesn't want to take the lead financially, morally, militarily. That's not even necessarily a criticism. It's certainly not an opinion. It's just counting. He doesn't want to send dollars that he could be dishing up to his mates to Ukraine to resist Russian imperial ambitions. He doesn't want to provide moral leadership because he doesn't believe in sovereignty, particularly as he's proved with his comments about Greenland and Canada. And he doesn't want to provide military leadership because he doesn't want America to be involved in foreign wars, as he has said repeatedly, largely for the same reason that he doesn't want to spend American dollars on foreign wars. So America's role as the protector of what we, I think, still accurately describe as the free world, America's role as the leader and the chief protector, the protector in chief of the free world, has never, to me, looked more fragile. And that is why I wonder whether it is time to use the word appeasement, whether what Donald Trump is doing, and you know that his new director of national intelligence is a Vladimir Putin fangirl, That's not even an exaggeration. She was also very warm towards Bashar al-Assad when he was gassing his own people in Syria. And he's made this woman, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence. Even Mitch McConnell voted against it. And guess what the ratio was? Guess what the vote was that got it over the line? A Vladimir Putin fangirl being put in charge of US intelligence. Yeah, you got it, 52-48. There it is again, the infernal ratio. So you've got this situation where everything we've held to be true since pretty much the turn of the 20th century, certainly since the end of the First World War, and absolutely since the middle of the Second, everything that we have held to be true with regard to America's role on the world stage and the primacy of territorial integrity, the importance of sovereignty and borders, seems to me to be under threat.